So just to compare now the CMV with this different images, and you see that it's not exactly the same. Now, take for example, don't consider the complex and the SADA because these are not, yet finalized, so there can be some problems in the quality. But just taking the SADA and the angioplex, you see that even if you take the same slab, there is a difference in the imaging. Slightly different, but it can be, it's different. Now, it could be because of the fact that the angioplex is using the phase and the amplitude, and the SADA is using only the amplitude. Who knows? The impression is that most of the time the SADA has more contrast, and one of the questions that we are asking is, it could be that because if you speak with the engineers, they told you that the phase is more sensitive, but not the amplitude. Now, and so you can get a slow feeling. You can get more details. But as I showed you before, one of the advantages of the angio OCTs is that you have high contrast, and if you start to add too many details, probably, particularly from the choroidal neovascularization, probably you have less contrast, and it's more difficult to interpret the images, but not a normal, a kind of nice angio. One of the interpretation of choroidal neovascularization with angio was that you actually can interpret this flow. So if you have a higher flow, it's brighter. If you have a lower flow, it's darker. But it doesn't make any sense for two reasons. One is that you have two time points, so that it's the only possibility. Second, if you look at these two images, you actually see that there is the brightness here is comparable to this part of the lesion, but it's just because the lesion is two layered, and so if you sample the right point, you get a highly reflective image here of a higher layer, and if you go deeper, you get actually the same reflective things. And it looks like similar to what you get with ICG. You remember that ICG is not like fluorescent angiography. ICG, more dye you have, more column of dye, more fluorescent you have. So if you look at and interpret this ICG, you can actually see that this is probably has more dye, so it's 2 layers or higher CMV here, but not here. And in fact, you actually confirm with the angio-OCTs. The big difference is that from angio OCTs to the angiography is that you can get different layers, and you can analyze different layers one by one. With with angiography, you get everything in one shot, so all the layers are the same way. And here, as I showed you before, the best to visualize the image is if you don't get on the same level of what you expect in the CMV. Now, fluorescing ICG of the same lesion, and you see that the higher contrast with the angio-OCTs, it makes the evaluation, the visualization of the coronal vascularization much better. So the big advantage here is that you have higher contrast. And the ICG, it's a little more difficult to interpret. Just a case of some lesion can be RP defect, can be a coronal vascularization or cold coronal vascularization. If you look at the OCTs, you actually see that there is just an RP detachment without any lesion. And of course here you see some masking effect that can create the idea of a round shape lesion, but there is no lesion. It's just pigments or masking, and that give you the shape of type of a coronal vascularization, but it doesn't exist. We actually already showed some polypoidal coronal vascularization, and speaking with Colin at breakfast, we actually see that sometimes it's visible, sometimes it's not. The bulge you actually see over the net, but the bulge here is visible, but in other cases is not, like as I showed you before. And that could be due to the location, but also due to the filling. For the MacTel, again, the suggestion to have a 3D will be perfect, because instead of developing in the horizontal, it's like the RAP lesion is going down. So if you want to visualize what you actually see with ICG, or and even better with a stereo ICG, you are not able to see with the angiocytes, because it's if you select one layer, you actually see only one vessel taken vertically, and so you are not able to identify it. If you take probably everything, all the layers, and you build a 3D, then you will probably be able to identify it. Otherwise, in these cases, the angiography, the stereo angiography, is working much better than angiocytes. Angioid streaks. Patient with complaining for some changes in his vision, and this pigmentary deposit was since 3 years, so nothing particular. The normal OCT shows something here, and this is some fluid probably over there. Now, if we take the fluorescein, it's difficult to understand which is the difference between this part and this part, that probably is the active CMV. If we take the late phases, you see the same leakage, so it's not clear if there is or not an active CMV. If you look at the ICG, the first shot, probably you don't identify anything except for the fact that there is some RP changes here, so you actually see much better the coronal vasculature, but there is a coronal vascularization here or not. What do you think? Who say yes, who say no? For yes. For no. Okay. Great. So, the late ICG, still, you think there is a coronal vascularization or not? Remember, here it's just atrophy. The angiocytes. You actually see the projection is not very nice, but if you look at my screen, it would be clear that these are the coronal vascularization. And now, if you look at the the angiosynthesis and the ICG, you can actually get also an ICG. You know that one of the way of getting a choroidal vascularization with ICG, it's an indirect way. So you look at the choroidal vascularization, the normal choroidal vessels, and you see here there is a masking vessel. So the entire, the choroidal vessel, all of a sudden, it's masked by something. And that is this part of the lesion. So not easy to detect here, much easier to detect in angio-OCTs. And again, the projector is not showing what you can actually see on my screen. If you want, I can show you much better the contrast. Another patient with a CNV. In the movies, you see very well this huge feeder, but there is probably something here. If we go to the, the two parts, one here and one here, and this is the normal OCT. Here a fluorescein. The ICG. And the angiosynthesis, where we actually see two, you see that this is not very well seen because the layers are different. So you see much better this new part of the lesion that is more a classic component, and not this one that is a sub-RP. So you actually see the two layers, and of course you have to decide which one do you want to see.
So, Giovanni, you're saying that the smaller part, you term it as newer onset, and the old one is a more chronic disease.
Exactly. But just
because of the vascular arrangement.
Exactly, and the location. Because, of course, you should have always, I didn't put on purpose, but the segmentation. So you actually see if it's over or under the RP. Here it is. You see, there is one under the RP, and the other one that it's this one that is not seen in this scan, but it's over.
Giovanni, because I always thought that when you think of chronic, their level of arborization is more standardized.
Yes.
As opposed to a more randomized newer CNV.
But remember that also the location, if it's under RP, is more regular, standardized than not when it's freeing the neurosensory brain. So, and you see here the two different parts. One more mature, I would say, more and the other one here. But I don't think it's related to the flow. It's just related to the location. But I can tell you that if you read some paper published, they told you that this is due to the fact that is the active part, so the flow is higher, and you have more contrast white things. I do not really think that this is a real explanation. Another case. So this again, polypoidal lesion, so you see that it's coming very slowly. And if we look at the ICG and the angiosynthesis, now you see that there is something probably, and Colin then tomorrow will tell us more on that, since he has a lot of experience on this type of choroidal vascularization. But you see, here you see something. You don't see completely all the bulge, but some of those are evident. Even if we saw it, the feeling was very slow. So it's difficult to say what we can see and what we cannot see. What about the feeder vessel? Can we see with an angiocentesis? So of course, if we look at the movie, we actually see the feeder vessel here, and with the fluorescein, the ICG late, of course, we don't see the feeder at this stage because the flow is already gone. But if we look at the angiocentesis, actually we see here, you see that, and if I compare with the visible, of course, because we saw before the ICG. Otherwise, it would be impossible to detect a feeder. And just moving a little bit, you see all the net. Now, this is another patient with a choroidal vascularization. She was allergic to iodine, so she didn't get an ICG. And this was the fluorescein. And here you see very well the choroidal vascularization. Now, if we look carefully, probably we can get something like a vein, probably because it's a bigger layer. Here you see the draining vein, and who knows if this could be the feeder, but we don't know. We don't know because we need the fluorescein. And so also with the fluorescein, it's impossible to detect. Another case, you see the fluorescein, the late phases, you actually see the vessel that is empty, and again, here is just due to the contrast. See if there is white leakage of the fluorescein. You actually see the empty vessel here that are corresponding to a perfused vessel with ICG. And if we take the ICG and we overlap the angiocentesis, it's quite nice to see the same type of net. And of course, depending on the imaging, you can get more or less contrast. But it's and just this was taken with angioplex, so it's you have more information. I'm afraid, and you see that it's similar to the ICG. It's not easy to detect as sometimes happens when you have more contrast between the new vessel and the surrounding area. But I think it's the big advantage of the angiocentesis, having such a high contrast. But the angiocentesis can be useful for differentiated macroatrophy. And if I have to say, right now, I think the easiest way to use the angiocentesis is for do a differential diagnosis in macroatrophy. Everything started in 2012 when we published this paper on IOBS. We actually did a differential diagnosis in Stargardt, or late onset Stargardt, and geographic atrophy secondary to AMD. Now, in ICG, if you wait the late phases, you have always dark atrophy, as we call in that paper. And you see that the dark area in the center part of the atrophy in Stargardt is not the same that you have in geographic atrophy secondary to AMD, where the fluorescent is the same, from the center to the surrounding area. And the interpretation at that time was that in this case, we have lack of corticapillary. So it was quite strange to think that Stargardt has lack of corticapillary is not a happy disease, why choriocapillary is affected, and in macular atrophy secondary to AMD, where we think it's more related to choriocapillary, it's still present. So if we look at the OCTs of these two patients, the thickness is the same, so it cannot be related to the thickness. Now, since we have the possibility to visualize choriocapillary, we did the same study, but adding, of course, the angio-CTs. Before going to present the results, I have to show you how to interpret the angio-CTs in patients with macular atrophy. So here a standard patient with, of course, lack of RP in autofluorescence. So now, if we look at that point and we look at the angio-CTs, we see that the vessel, the huge choroidal vessel, from dark became all of a sudden white. White, yes. So the first presentation this morning was telling us that one of the interpretation of dark vessels in normal subjects is that the flow is too fast, and that actually was the first interpretation. The flow was too fast in the choroidal vessels, so this is why are dark. It cannot be. How can it be that all of a sudden, after atrophy, it's becoming, the flow is slowing down? There is no reason. Now, what helps us so from dark to white? What helps us to interpreting these images is the angio B scan. But remember, the angio B scan, so it's coming from the angio reflective OCTs. Now you have RP here and lack of RP from here. Now if you look at the lights, it's coming here and it's reduced, so you don't have lights inside the choroidal vessel here. So that would be dark. And here you see the same size vessels, but there is no RP, so light comes through, and so you have the white vessels. Now, but why at this level, so deeper than the choriocapillary, we have white between vessels? It cannot be, there is no vessel over there. So here is the projection effect, or artifact, as you want to call it. And so between the two vessels, we see white here just because there is choriocapillary. So if we sample here, this white part is due to the choriocapillary, the presence of choriocapillary. Here we see dark between the white vessels because there is no choriocapillary, so there is no projection effect. Now, but there is this area. You see that here the vessel is dark, then of course no RPE, more light, it becomes white. But between this white vessel and white vessel there is some white things. So why you see here white? Now we go back to the ICG, and if you look at the ICG, you see that there is a RP is ending here. Then you have a dark space here, but between this area and this area, we still have some fluorescence. So the idea is that we have RP and choriocapillary. Then, of course, the RP in Stargardt disappeared. So the choriocapillary is still there. But then in the center part, the initial area of atrophy, of course, there is no RP, there is no choriocapillary at the end. So the three steps, presence of RP and choriocapillary, then just the choriocapillary, and no RP, no choriocapillary, can explain this ICG image, and of course also the angiocities. Now, sorry, if we compare, you see the dark and the white. Now, if we take another patient with Stargardt, we always see very well the huge choroidal vessel, the alar layer. And this is due to the fact there is no choriocapillary and subtle layer. Now, if we look at the macular atrophy secondary to AMD, you see, and we actually saw this morning this almost the same image, where we actually don't see the normal huge choroidal layer, the alar layer, because some choriocapillary and some subtle layer is still present, because of the fact, as was shown by histology, in macular atrophy secondary to AMD, still some RPE cells are present in the atrophic area. So these few cells probably are sufficient to maintain a little bit of subtle layer and choriocapillary. Now, the big step forward would be to have a histology to compare with what we saw with the angiocities. And thanks to Jerry Lute and Joanna Seddon, here is a case of a patient who was treated with this lectin stain, and just showing the central part of atrophy looks like that in AMD. That was an AMD patient. And just to compare with the image that I showed you before, looks quite similar. Now, what about Stargardt? Thanks to Joel and Jerry, we actually have a patient with Stargardt, and you see that there is no choriocapillary like we saw in the angiocities or in the late phase of ICG. So, just to get some patients and see the difference between the presence or absence of choriocapillary and subtle layer, you easily change easily do the differential diagnosis and start to think now to two things. One, the possibility to have a treatment, a new treatment for AMD, but you put also late onset Stargardt. Two different mechanisms probably of the disease, and you could probably have no results. And I can tell you that there are many patients with late onset Stargardt that you never expect. And sorry. And the same things for a Stargardt treatment. If you have a Stargardt treatment and you want to put some cells, stem cells or RPE cells in the center of atrophy, it will never work out because, of course, there is no choriocapillary. If I have to choose where to put those cells, probably will be at the edge of the atrophy because in that place probably there is still some choriocapillary, and in any case we can actually detect with the angiocities or an ICG and see where I have to put my cells. And probably those cells will maintain the choriocapillary and maintain some vision. Okay, so yes, ready to answer to your questions.
How about macular atrophy in diabetes? Ischemic macular atrophy. You based on the size.
But here it's more, RP and choroidocapillary and choroid atrophy. In diabetic, I would not expect to see any RP atrophy, except if you do laser.
I mean, for when you do OCT and you will see the FSC zone.
Yes, of course.
When it's enlarged, does it mean there is an atrophy?
Well, it's ischemic or not perfused area, but it's not atrophy. Atrophy is usually, we think it's atrophy when there is no RP cells.
My question, can we use the CT this type of model to identify the location of the polyps as a treatment for our PDT in IPCV? Can we locate exactly by?
I think Colin tomorrow will tell us more, but my idea is that, of course, the net is visible, so you can actually, if you want to treat all the net, of course. If you want to treat just the bulge, like I do usually for if I add PDT or laser, could be probably not the perfect diagnostic tool for that purpose. But of course, the net you see, you don't see all the time the bulge. At least in my experience. Tomorrow, Colin will tell us even more.
Okay, thank you very much for talking to us, Rangi. Can I just find out from you, do you have early images of the early Stargardts? Just wondering, with dark choroid, increased lymphoma skin, how would the image look like as compared to macular atrophy?
Dark choroid is not dark atrophy. Dark choroid, I said dark atrophy. Dark choroid is actually probably lipofuscin or melanin. It's a big discussion also on that. There are two possibilities. Or the lipofuscin inside, or just the lipofuscin inside the cells that push up the melanin granules at the apical part of the RP. And that could be one of the reasons why you have dark choroid. But in this case, we describe a dark atrophy that you don't see in fluorescence, but you see in ICG. And it's just the center part of the atrophy secondary to Stargardt. Sorry, what was the question?
No, I just wondering whether the images before the macular atrophy of how dark choroid looks like on OCT angle, because is there masking of the underlying core capillaries as well, like the dark images before your macular atrophy actually?
We have some patients that are, relatives of young relatives of Stargardt late onset start. And even if patient were 20/20 visual acuity, we are not complaining for anything. If you look at the fundus, you start to see some changes at the level of RP. We did the angiocytes in those patients, and quite strikingly, there were already some defects in the choroidocapillary. So we don't really know when appears. And probably going more direct to your question, if we have a dark choroid, there is no problem to visualize the choroidocapillary. It's not sufficient to decrease the presence or not presence of dark choroid. So the lipofuscin content of the RP is not changing a lot with visualization of the choroid. But again, what we were seeing was the central part. And you see that the choroidocapillary in outside the area of atrophy was quite evident because of a projection effect. So you can actually see.
Because this is a question, because earlier on we see that the images you showed that the RPE disappears before the coral capillaries, am I right? From the
Yes.
atrophy.
Yes.
So we're assuming that. But if in the early stages where there's no macular atrophy, in the presence of dark coral, you will see it lighting up as well. But you can't tell whether the RPE is actually still present in the center, still light up. Only when the coral capillary disappears, when you find that it's dark, then you find that it's you're assuming that the RPE disappears.
Well, the best way to say if there is a RP or not RPE is just using autofluorescence. You're not using these things. Indirectly, you can tell us just because the angiocidin can tell us just because there is or not the projection effect. However, if you go back to the AMD, you see that still there is some subtler and choriocapillary, but of course it's less but not a normal subtle. In fact, you see much better the subtler layer, but not the homogeneous choriocapillary. So it's I would say, an indirect way of evaluating the choriocapillary. But RPE at this level is not changing the visualization.
One of the pitfalls of the OCT imager that you highlighted is that for CNV complex, part of it can be more hyper-reflective and part of it can be hypo, and that is due to the segmentation. So what is your advice for us users in terms of segmentation? When we do a OCT, shall we do multiple segment or shall we do a segment whereby increase the thickness of the scan?
There is no a right answer. The only thing that I can tell you is that, as I said before, use the custom, not the custom, but the segmentation that are already in the software. And then you can actually change, but probably, with my experience, it's just taking the slab and then moving up and down. Then you actually get probably the most, because the situation is always how to get the highest contrast, because it's the contrast that shows the better image. So if you take a larger slab, you start to get information from other layer, and then you get less contrast. You see less clear the vision. So it's a kind of trick, but you have to try. It's only but starting with the standardized slab, I think it's the best way.
Are there any more questions? If not, let's thank Dr. Sarangi.
Thank you.
It's been talking for a while. Thanks a lot.